Ladles and jelly spoons, welcome back to Badgerworks. Today, this. This is a set of World War II British paratroopers in 1/72 scale from Airfix, and today I'm going to show you how to modify them. So, let's get on with it. So yes, this video is long overdue. Long-time viewers of the channel will remember some time ago I built an Airfix 1/72 scale C47 Skytrain for a museum display, and in that video, or in the finished product, I included a couple of paratroopers, and I don't know why, but I never videoed how I made the paratroopers. I made the aircraft but not the thing. So anyway, one of the questions I get asked all the time: where did you get the paratroopers from? You know, how did you modify them? All this kind of stuff. So I've been tidying up in the workshop. I know I keep saying that, but it's a very long, drawn-out process. And I actually found the box of paratroopers that I used originally, and so it reminded me. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to do this video, and hopefully, you know, help out some people who have asked this question. So yes, this is, as I said, the Airfix 1/72 scale World War II British paratroops set. So if you wanted to do the same thing, it's A01723. Not a lot of info, just the pictures on the back. I don't even know what date this thing is. Has it got a date on it? Contents may vary from those illustrated. Well, it doesn't actually. They are exactly the same. But of course, the thing is with these paratroopers is they... Well, let me get them out of the box. I'll show you. These are ground paratroopers. So let me just... Like I said, this box has already been opened because this is what I used before. Right. So yes, these are ground paratroopers. And there's various different figures and whatnot. So you've got a supply container, and there's a mortar somewhere. There it is. There's a mortar, and there's a base for the mortar, which is there. There's also a base here for one of the parachutes. So there are a couple of the figures, which is... Where are they? There's a couple of guys somewhere, like pulling the parachutes in. Oh, there you go. So there, you see. And the idea is you cut that off, you attach it to that, and it's like someone reeling in a parachute. I used these to make the figures in that diorama, or in that, you know, display. And the thing is, now I'm just trying to remember how I did it, which is the awkward bit. So there's a few things to note about British military parachuting, especially in World War II. So let me cover that first so you can understand the design process. So when it was basically Winston Churchill who was instrumental in deciding that the British should have paratroopers. He was also instrumental in deciding that it would be the RAF's responsibility to train British paratroopers. So although the paratroopers were army, they were trained by the RAF, and that goes on to this day. The parachute training school is at RAF Bryce Norton and is run by the RAF. The idea being is that the RAF provide the aircraft, so it makes sense for them to provide the training as well, which does make sense. So that was that. Now, there were lots of different aircraft used. I'm not going to go into all the different... I can't even remember all the different types of aircraft they used, but they tried all different kinds of aircraft. And there is actually one story that I'm not going to tell now because I'm going to save it, because I'm going to do a video on it at some point. Don't ask me when. But the one that everyone's most common with is the Skytrain, the C47, or the Dakota, as you can call it as well. The civilian version is the DC-3 Dakota, and the military version is the C47 Skytrain, but they're the same aircraft. Now, but there are differences between American paratroop operations and British parachute operations. So, for example, if you look at an American Skytrain, you will see that the static line, the anchor cable inside the aircraft, runs in the cabin at basically head height from front to back. If you look at an RAF Skytrain, the anchor cable actually starts at, I think, waist height at the front of the cabin and goes down to almost the floor at the back of the cabin. So it's much, much lower. And there's a reason for that, and I'll come to that in a second. The other thing that the British did was they added a 9-foot extension to the static line. I've got pictures of these things. If I remember, I'll add the pictures as we're going along, because these were reference pictures I used in the original build. So the static line is much longer. And the reason for that is because there were instances where a paratrooper would jump out of the aircraft and either their parachute or indeed the paratrooper would hit the tail of the aircraft, hit the elevators. And there were, as far as I know, there were cases of actual parachutes getting hung up on the elevators. Or they would hit and they could be damaged. So obviously that's not a good thing. So they basically added this 9-foot extension, which meant that you fell a lot further away from the aircraft before the chute started to deploy. So there are big differences. And again, if you look at the original model that I made, you'll see that the static lines that I've got coming out of the door, they come out at the bottom of the door, not the top. If it's a US aircraft, they will come out at the top of the door. If it's a British aircraft, they will be at the bottom of the door. So that's all by the by. Now, the other thing to keep in mind when you're designing figures like this is, again, look at the doctrine. Now, British paratroop, I can't speak to the Americans, I don't know how they do it, but at the time, the doctrine for British paratroopers was you would cross your arms over the reserve chute and basically step out of the aircraft. And then you would then, ideally, cross your ankles. So you'd cross your ankles and you have your arms crossed over the thing. Doesn't always work like that, but that was the idea. So that's what we needed to have. Now, as I said, I'm trying to remember how I did this. So you're going to have to bear with me for a bit. So, because the thing is, this chap here, hang on, let me get the other camera in so you can see what I'm doing. All right, that's more like it. So this chap here, who I believe is supposed to be wounded, and I have cut the base off of this guy already, but you'll see the way he's standing would make a lot of sense for a paratrooper, and that was originally why I cut him off, because he's supposed to be holding his static line. But I didn't use him in the finish, and I'm just trying to think how I did this now. Because I know, because if you look here, for example, you can see this guy here has had his arm cut off, and as has this one. So these are both the same figure, and I cut their arms off. And I'm just trying to remember how I did this now. Oh, this is awkward. Right, okay, so I remember one of them now. So the guy who's actually in the doorway was one of these. So let me just snip that off of the frame. So what I did with this is, because he looks like he's stepping forwards, so he was in the door, and what I did was, he basically, this is the other thing, is when you step out of the aircraft, you basically put your hands on the side of the door and then kind of use that to push yourself out. Then you cross your arms over the chute. So what I did here was I took this figure here, because he is taking a step forwards, as you can see, and I left this arm as it was, because he's actually holding this up. There's a lot of flashing on these, by the way. So he's holding his arm in the right position to be coming out of the door. And then I basically took one of these figures. Let me find another one of these. If there is another one. Oh, don't tell me there isn't another one of them. not that one. I might have used both of them. But basically these guys had their elbow cocked, holding on to the rifle. So I cut the rifle off, cut the arm off, cut this arm off, and replaced it, and basically modified the joint so that he had his arm across his chest. And then I used some modelling putty to make the reserve chute, make the main, because he does have a backpack, but that's not a chute, that's a backpack. So I made a backpack and a reserve chute, and then crossed his arm over that. So that's that one. I then did the same thing with the other one, but which chat was it that I used for the guy jumping out? It was one of these. So I used one of these ones here, and I did the same thing. I cut the arms off and folded them across the chute and did it that way. So let me just see if I can come up with something similar with what's left, because like I say, unfortunately I used the ones that were in there. So speaking of which, there's something noisy going over now. Right, let's just snip this off. Alright, let's get rid of that. And then we'll just cut this off of his foot. Really should put my glasses on to do this, but still, never mind. So just trim that down. And I say I'm doing this a bit kind of rough and ready, but it's just to give you an idea. So, like that, you see. Now we cut his arm off. And the nice thing about, I don't know what these figures are made of, but there's advantages and disadvantages, because this stuff is very bendy. It's more like rubber than plastic. But the problem that I had, as I recall, and you'll see this as we go on, is this stuff is really, really awkward to glue together. I think in the end I used super glue, but even that didn't hold very well. They're very delicate. You have to be very careful with them. But anyway, so that's our basic figure. So what we want now is an arm to put across his chest. Now, what have we got in the way of curved arms here? Do you know the one that makes me laugh? Is this guy here, just as an aside. I'm not quite sure. He looks like he's doing exercises. I'm not quite sure what he's actually meant to be doing. It just looks like he's doing exercises. Anyway, that's beside the point. Right, I think what we can do, I think actually, oh, hang on a minute. I think I used this guy. Let's just snip this guy off for a minute. I think it was his arms that I used. Yeah, maybe it was. Okay, right, so let's... Right, so we need to make a cut through there to disconnect his arms from his face. By the way, when it comes to painting these, they're a nightmare. They really are. There is not a lot of detail on these. And I'm not very good at figure painting at the best of times. Right. Cut that there. And then we'll just cut through the gun. Like that. And that gives us an arm. Where are my glasses? There they are. Right. There really is so little detail on this. Right, let's cut that gun off. And we need to kind of reshape his hand a little bit, just to give us the rough shape of the hand. Because we want it kind of looking like he's got his fist closed. So it's you don't have to go mad with it. It's just get rid of the sharp edges and kind of round it all over a little bit. The trouble is with this stuff is because it's so flexible, it's actually very difficult to mould or to shape. I think that will do us for now. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to get this arm. Let me get a pair of tweezers, it'd be easier for you to see what I'm doing with any luck. So we need to get this arm across his body like that, you see. So what we need to do is just change the angle of this cut a little bit. So instead of his arm being up like that, we want it across like that. So what we want to do is just change the angle of this cut a little bit like that, and hopefully that should do it. We might need to do a bit more. No, I think that might work. Let's just trim a little bit off this way just to change the angle a little bit. Right, let's see how that works. Yeah, that should do. Okay, now we've got to try and glue this on. But what I'm going to do first of all is, if I've got some, use a bit of modelling putty and make the parachutes. Right, let's get a little bit of that. There's obviously all kinds of different ones of these. You can get milliput and all the rest of it. This is just what I have to hand. But the way this works is a two-part epoxy, and you just mix it. So you've got blue and yellow, and you just mix it until it's a consistent green. So I'll get this mixed up, and then we'll look at how we're going to use it. Right, there we go. It takes a bit of mixing up this stuff. I think a lot of it's because it's cold. So what we want to do is probably, there's a little bit too much here, but that's all right. So we'll just pinch a little bit of this off. You've got to be careful with this stuff because it's quite sticky. And you put it down for a couple of seconds and it just sticks. It's best to get it wet, really. That might still be a bit much. Let's get rid of a little bit more of that. Might even still be a bit much. Right, so what we want to do is make this into basically like a pillow shape. So it's kind of a rectangle. Which is, like I said, not the easiest thing to do. I have the greatest respect for people who do this kind of modelling because I'm rubbish at it. Right, and let's see if we can finagle this into some kind of shape. I'd say it's actually better to wet the tools before you start because they don't stick to the stuff quite so much. But like I said, this is more just for demonstration purposes. And then what you can do is use the back of the knife, and we want to put a little crease there. I hope you can see what I'm doing here, it's really awkward. And we put a little crease there like that. And then it's almost like an envelope. This goes over the top because the top flap of the bag goes over the bottom. Like that, you see. Now obviously you can put as much effort into this as you want. I did this very, very simply for the simple fact that the model was going to be in a fairly large display case, so you were not going to be able to get that close to it. So, but there you go, like that, you see. And then what we can do is hopefully get his arm to stick on with a bit of super glue. But like I said, I don't know what this plastic is that they've used, but it is really, really difficult to glue. So we'll just put a blob of glue on there. This is just super glue gel from the pound shop. So it is Loctite, but it came from the pound shop. And then we can see if we can get his arm into place. But we kind of want it need to move that up a little bit. So kind of like that. Oh, I keep moving it. There we go. Like that, you see, or something to that effect. And obviously you can take your time and make sure all the angles are right and everything, so that he's actually in the exact right place. But that's roughly how you want to do it. Now obviously that's left gaps all around here, but we can fill that in with a bit of modeling putty afterwards. So we'll let that dry, and then we'll go on from there. Just be very careful with it, because if you touch it, it will just fall apart. As I found, much to my annoyance. Right, so here he is in his glory. I've given him a coat of grey primer just to unify everything. I also made the backpack for the back, which is probably way too big actually looking at it, but it's fine. I also filled in the gap around his arm. I just used some Mr. Dissolve putty for that, but you could use any model filler will do. So that's that. I did clean it up a little bit, but as you can see I didn't do a terribly good job of it, but like I said, this is just for demonstration purposes. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly throw some paint on him, and again I'm not going to go into it in too much effort, so I'm going to start with a bit of this khaki drab, basically do everything, helmet, uniform, the pack, everything with this. So that's next. Right, now I am certainly not the best when it comes to figure painting, especially not at this scale, so like I say, this is more just for kind of demonstration purposes than anything else. If you want to learn how to paint figures, then I am really not the person to ask. But I say I'll get this done fairly quickly, and then we'll look at how to make the parachutes. Alright, so I'm just doing his face and his hands with this Citadel Kislev flesh. And again, I'm not being too precious with it, because quite frankly there is virtually no detail on this, and I am not the best figure painter in the world. But it's more just to give us the, give us the look. It won't stand up to close scrutiny, but in this case it's not really that important. As I say, this is a fairly awful figure. Doesn't really have a great deal of detail, and it's got some awful mould lines and flashing and things on it. So we'll just kind of do what we can. Right, there we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do his boots and his hair black, and then we're going to put a couple of other little bits on him. I mean, honestly, it's I am by no means any kind of figure painter. If you want to learn how to paint figures properly, this possibly is not the channel for you. I'm not too bad with the larger scales, like 1/35 and up. I can manage, but these ones, no. And that's not to say they can't be painted well. I mean, I've seen people paint, you know, 1/72 scale figures, and it's just absolutely unbelievable. But then I think it also helps to have a figure with a lot more, you know, detail and everything, just a better figure than this, because this one is quite frankly bloody awful. Right, let's see if we can do his hair. I should use my wet palette really for doing things like this, but it will take longer to set up than it would to actually do the painting. Alright. Does that looks like a moustache, doesn't it? Or it's just a really bad moulding, I can't tell. Anyway, right, let's see if we can paint his chin strap, which is going to be hilarious. And then we've got one more little touch to do. Right, this is Revel Aqua Colour. It's wood brown, but it actually works really well for leather. I like this, the way the lid clips on like this, because it makes it a lot more stable. Okay, let's see how well this works. This is going to be hilarious. Actually worked a lot better than I thought it was going to. Right, all that just for that one little daub of paint. Anyway. Right, and the last thing I'm going to do is use some of this Reichland Flesh Shade on his face and hands, just to give us a bit of contrast. It's not the greatest model in the world, but it just helps a little bit. There we go. So we'll give him a few minutes to dry, and then we'll start working on the parachute. Right, so here's our chap all painted up. I've just given him a spritz of matte lacquer, which is why he's still slightly shiny, because it's not dry yet. So we're going to put him to one side for a minute, and we're going to start on the parachute. Now, for the parachute, there are a few measurements that we need. So I've worked all this out. So the static line is 12 feet long, which is roughly 3,657 millimeters, which if you divide by 72 to get 1/72 scale, works out about 51 millimeters. The 9-foot extension is 2,743 millimeters, which divided by 72 works out at roughly 38 millimeters, which gives us a total for the static line of 89 millimeters. So that's fine. So if you just wanted to do the static line with the bag on the end, I'll get to the bag in a minute, then it would be 89mm long. We want to have the chute starting to deploy, so I've added another 41mm. That rounds it up to a total length of 120mm. Now we also need a little bit extra on each end to actually attach it to the figure and to the aircraft, so I've made it 125mm long. So in order to make this thing actually stay and not just hang down straight, we're going to use some wire. Now I'm going to use this. This is from my local garden centre, but this is just tying wire from the garden. I mean, you could use anything really, any solid core wire will do, but I'm going to use this. So we want a piece of this 125mm long. So I'll cut a bit off. If I can find a ruler, there we go. Right, so 125, let's make it 130, just round it up. And side cutters, and we'll just snip that off. So this is going to be our line. Right, let's put that to one side. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this plastic, it's got a plastic coating on it, so I'm going to get rid of that. So I'll just use wire strippers for that, and basically what we want to do is just, it comes off better in pieces basically. But it's, you could use anything for this, any solid core thin wire. It doesn't, because the thing is it's not holding a lot of weight, so it doesn't have to be super strong. It just needs to be, you know, stiff. Stop laughing at the back. So that's that. Now, a quick word on the parachute. Again, I can't speak to the American ones, but I'm assuming they're probably the same. The way these chutes worked is the chute itself is inside a bag. So, and obviously you've got the backpack that the paratrooper is wearing, but the chute itself is packed inside a silk bag. So the static line is connected to the aircraft at one end, and at the other end it's connected to that bag, not to the parachute. So when the paratrooper jumps out, obviously the static line is connected to the aircraft, and I know I'm teaching you a lot to suck eggs here, but for those that don't know, when the as the paratrooper falls away from the aircraft, obviously that pulls the static line tight. When it gets to its full extent, what will happen is the line will pull the bag out of the backpack with the parachute inside it. As the trooper continues to fall away, that will pull out the guy lines, and then when the guy lines reach their full extent, it pulls the parachute out of the bag stays connected to the end of the static line, the paratrooper falls away, and the chute deploys. That's the plan. So, what we need to do is kind of simulate that. So we need a bag. Now what I did with the other one to make the bag is I used a piece of this. Now this is a wet wipe that I've dried out. So you can do it with a hairdryer, or you can just take them out, lay it flat and leave it for, you know, a couple of hours or whatever, and it will eventually dry out. And it gives us a nice material. You could use like kitchen roll or something as well, anything will do. But this just has a nice texture to it, I find. So I'm going to cut a piece of this off, and I'm just going to cut a strip off the end. If I can find my scissors. Right, so that's that. We don't need quite this much, so, but we'll leave it at this length for now, and then we'll wrap it all up, and then we'll trim it down afterwards. This might actually still be a bit big. I might cut that in half. Right, I'll just cut that in half again, just because it seemed to be a bit big. So that will do for that. Now this obviously does not look like a static line, so what we're going to do is we're going to cover it in masking tape. This is 1mm masking tape. So what we want to do is measure this. So the extent of our static line is 89mm. So if we measure down 89 millimeters, or well, we need a piece of tape 89 millimeters long basically. Where's the end of it? There it is. And this is, to be fair, quite tricky, but you know, what isn't when it comes to model making, let's face it. So what I'll do is I'll just stick that on there, and we'll go down to here, and we will take a knife and we'll just cut that off at 89 millimeters, like that, you see. Now this is the really tricky bit, because what we've got to do now is, let's straighten this out a bit more. Because what we've got to do now is stick the tape onto the wire, which is not easy. So we want to leave a few millimeters at the top so that we can use that to attach it to the aircraft. Just talk amongst yourselves for a minute. Right, like that, you see. Now if you want to be really clever, you can put a bit on the other side as well, but I'll do that off camera. And so now we need to make the bag, but we also need to make the guy lines. So for the guy lines I'm going to use this. This is Prim knitting in elastic. It's basically very thin elastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut a few pieces of this off to the right length, or roughly the right length. This is where everything starts getting very fiddly. And you don't need to have, you know, the complete set of guy lines, because, you know, you don't want to go too mad with it. But what we're doing is just to kind of give that effect of the guy lines. That's what we're after. So we'll do maybe half a dozen. And I'm deliberately cutting these a bit long because we can trim them at the other end afterwards. Right, that'll probably do us. So now, I really am going to get my glasses, because this is where it starts getting tricky, because now we've got to try and get it all together. So, we want some super glue, and what we want to do is super glue all this together. So we'll put a bit of glue on here, and that will also secure the end of the tape. And then we take our guy ropes and just basically touch them onto the glue, and that should be enough to hold them, because they don't weigh anything. But try and get them straight if you can. Oh. Glue's starting to dry already. Because what these will do is as well is help hide the wire. You won't hide it completely, but it will hide it for the most part. Like that, you see. I know this is not easy to see on a white background. It is there. So now we take our bit of fabric and we'll put a bit more glue on. And we use that and we very, very gently wrap that. I'll try and keep all these guy ropes out of the way. And we wrap that around. And it doesn't need a lot, just a few turns. Oh, this is really tricky. Like that. And then we use a bit more super glue on here. Wrap that around. Oh, and not do that, hopefully. And then we can trim that down. And then a bit more super glue to secure the end of it. Like that. Alright, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll get the other camera back in and you can see what we've got to so far. There you can see now what we've done. And that gives us our static line. I'll say I've got to put a bit of tape on the other side of it yet. And our guy ropes. So what we do now is we just bring these guy ropes down to the end. They don't need to be super tight. Now I'm going to trim these off. I want to leave a couple of millimeters on the end to attach it to the paratrooper, but we'll just trim those off like that. And we kind of want it like that, you see. So it's not pulled tight, we want it just a little bit kind of loose, so they can kind of billow slightly, if that makes sense. And then we just glue those into place like so. So I'll put the other bit of tape on this and then we'll attach it to the paratrooper. Right, so there we are. I'll put the other bit of tape on. I've given it a quick look over with our old favourite, the XF55 deck tan, just because the tape's a bit, you know, yellow. So the last thing, well, not quite the last thing, but one of the last things we need to do is we need to differentiate between the static line and the extension. So what we need to do is get our ruler back out and we need to measure. It's really awkward doing this in front of the camera, but we want to go from the end of the tape and we need to go 38 millimeters. So it's about there. And what we're going to do is we're going to add this. This is a jump ring. It's actually a bit big really, but it will do for our nefarious purposes. And what we're going to do is we're going to put that on here with a drop of super glue, and that just basically gives us that that, like I say, that differentiation between the two parts. So we'll let that dry, and then what we'll do once this is dry, because obviously that's very shiny, we will hit the whole thing with some matte lacquer, and then we'll attach it to the Paratrooper. Right, this has all had a chance to dry up now, so get everything in. Oh, come here. And it's, I say, that's just knocked the shine off of that ring. I mean, obviously you could paint it or do whatever, but it's fine like that. Now what we want to do next is just take a little pair of pliers, and we want to put a little bend on the end of this, like that, and that's so that it can fit. What I did was, while the green stuff was still, well, before it went off, I basically, you can see there, I poked a hole in the back of it with a cocktail stick. So what we want to do now is get some super glue on the end of here, like that, and then pop that in there. Now obviously, you know, you could do this, you know, properly, as it were, and actually have the pack open and everything, but this again is fine for our purposes. And there we go. And as you can see, this wire will hold him quite successfully because there's virtually no weight on it. So yeah, there you go. So hopefully this has been of use to some of you. Like I say, this was a question I've been asked a lot, was how I did this, and now you know. So yeah, hopefully that's answered the question. And as ever, I'd like to take a moment and thank my top tier patrons, Amy and the Anonymous Tosh, and all my other patrons and all my channel members, all much appreciated. As in fact are all of you, whoever watches and likes and comments and subscribes and that kind of thing, all really does help. So yes, much appreciated. But there you go. Just a fairly, you know, I say a short one, it's probably going to be really long by the time I've edited it. You know what my videos are like. So I know I don't normally talk about what's coming up next, but I've actually got a couple of videos coming up involving a project of my daughter's. So hopefully you'll stick around for that. And we'll see you on the next video. Thanks very much for watching. Cheers. Bye.